My name is Millie Wald, Glatt Wald. I grew up, right now I live in Zeeland, North Dakota, a nice little town. In McIntosh County, I grew up in Emmons County on a farm about 5 miles northeast of Hague. My kids always say, "Ma's from Hague." And I moved to Hague when I started high school. After high school, I went to California for a year, didn't like that, came home, went to Butte, Montana. That wasn't so hot either. So I came home and married a farmer. We farmed on 3 different farms in the Ashley area. And then in '65, we bought a farm 12 miles northeast of Zeeland. And this farm happens to be the homestead of Bill's great-grandfather. So that was has been Wald land for, I don't even know right now. They homesteaded in 1888.
So why don't you tell me what your maiden name is again? Tell me a little bit about that side of your family.
My maiden name is Glatt. I'm a daughter of Mike and Elizabeth Solly Glatt. And I am number 11 in a family of 12, 6 boys and 6 girls. The older siblings, of course, worked a lot harder than I did. My oldest sister was married before I was born. So I have a niece and a nephew that are older than I am. And then in '51, my parents moved to town, so I got to go to high school. That was first one in the family.
Of all of the 11 or 10 before you, you're the first one who went to high school?
Yes, because the saying always was for girls to go to high school. You don't need high school to wash diapers. Okay.
What type of chores did you do on the farm?
I had to help. The chores I had to do, I had to help with the milking, feeding calves, and of course picking the unending rocks. Rocks and rocks. We'd have a trailer. We'd pull it with 2 horses, of course, and all of us would be out and around and picking up. There's another one over there. Go get it. And then when it was haying time, I had to drive the team of horses on a windrow of hay. We had a hay loader, which elevated the hay up the back of the trailer, or the hay box. And my sister usually, or one of my brothers, would be forking it away. And I was supposed to drive plus help step that hay down so we'd get more on. And there was a harness contraption of ropes on there. When the load was full, we'd take it home, back it up in front of the barn, and somehow they hooked up that rope harness thing and pulled the load of hay up into the hayloft. So that was pretty slick. And then Dad was up there and he would stack it nicely. And then when the hayloft was full, it went on piles out in the hay fence.
So was this the 1940s?
Yes.
And you're still using horses?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We had a couple of tractors, but for haying and things like that, horses were much better, handier. And I didn't have to drive the tractor. Horses I could drive.
Did you ever have to drive tractors?
After I got married, yes. A lot of tractors, a lot of hours.
Why don't you tell me what would have been the difference with the type of activities that you did when you were growing up until you were a teenager on the farm, and then when you were a married wife once again working on the farm? What was the difference?
The difference was, at home, my parents were older, so they were a little better, a little more established. They had a little money already by the time I was growing up. But then after I got married, And we started at the bottom again and we milked a few cows and rented, our first 2 farms were rented. And then once we moved to the Venturia area, that was our address when we moved over here. Then we had, more cows and kids, and we raised a family of 7. We lost our oldest son in a farm accident in '85, and that changed a few things, but we went on. Now we have our 6 kids are all married. We have 16 grandchildren, and we have a great-grand on the way.
That's special. What type of, first we'll start with the farm you grew up on. What type of crops and what type of livestock would have been on the farm you grew up on?
We had Holstein milk cows. And so we milked, and my dad got a milking machine. So way back, I have no idea what year, but I know I didn't have to milk cows by hand. See, it pays to be one of the younger ones. And crops, he did wheat, corn, oats, and they had a little flax once in a while too. And then after we got married, then we had wheat, oats, and sometimes a little barley and corn. So.
Were you more grain farmers than livestock?
No, we milk cows. We built, in '69, we built a new dairy barn. So we milked as high as 80 cows, twice a day, 7 days a week. And that's how we raised our family, plus the grain.
That really ties you to the farm, doesn't it?
Oh, goodness gracious. I always said, we never go anyplace because of the milk cows. Well, all of a sudden in '86, the milk cows went goodbye and we still didn't go anyplace.
Was it the market that made the cows go?
No, the lack of help. The kids were gone. It takes a lot of manpower to milk cows, and it's hard work, and we were getting older, and so we sold the milk cows and got a few more stock cows and did that for a few years, and then I don't even know what year we retired.
I was going to ask you that. What year you got here? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Was it what type of transition was it for you when you went from very active on the farm life to some retired life here in Zeeland?
I love it here. I love being in town where there's other people and there's things to do. Out on the farm, there was plenty to do. There was garden and yard work and always fences to fix and, things like that. But interaction with people here is what I like, is what's good for me.
Do you think that for most people it's pretty isolated when you're on the farm?
Oh, definitely. Yes, it is isolated. Very, because who do you see? After we moved to town, it took me a long time. On the farm, when someone drives in the yard, when you hear a car or whatever, you look, who's here? Well, we were in town, and every time a car went by, I looked, who's coming? Took me a while to get over that.
They weren't stopping, were they?
No, they weren't. And here in this corner, there's quite a bit of traffic.
Why don't we talk about cooking and canning and that sort of thing? Were you involved in that when you were growing up, or as a wife, or both?
I remember canning at home. My mother always had a big garden, and it was down in a valley. We had a dam on the farm at home, and the garden was always below the dam where the dam would run over, and we'd always have to go down there, and Mother had it, or Dad, or whoever, it was hooked up so we could water from the dam in the garden. So Mother always had a very nice garden. And she canned like your vegetables. And I remember canning meat. You know, they'd butcher in the fall, they'd butcher a cow and some hogs, and the meat was, there were no freezers, there was no electricity. So everything was canned. And as handy as that was, but I hated washing those chars from the canned meat because I had the little hands, because I was younger, and I always had to wash those chars, and that was really stuck to the bottom of the jar. But yeah, that was good meat, that canned meat. And
So when did you get electricity on the farm you grew up on?
about the day we moved off. Electricity came just a couple of days before we moved off the farm.
So when you got married and you started your farm life, had your mother already taught you how to cook and can? Did you know those skills?
No, I learned more from my sister, because when I was in high school, summers I would have to not board out, but I'd have to help on my sister's farm with her family. And then I learned to cook from her. I learned some at home too, but my mother was very particular, and my dad was a very fussy eater. So things had to be just so, and that's not something Millie could make. Ma had to do it. So I didn't learn too much cooking, but then after we were married, I'd go home and Ma, how do you make this? And write it all down. I've got lots of handwritten directions on how to make chicken and rice. And I remember Sunday nights, Ma had this little blue bowl that Jello. We'd get a bowl of Jello like that, and always bananas on top of that. And Saturdays, we'd bake a cake. So Sunday nights we had cake and we had Jello, and living was good.
Did you do any German recipes?
Yes, I learned how to make Kuchen. We make the wedding Kuchen though, not the one with all the dressing on. And things like dumplings and noodles and cream noodles, which is a big hit. We never had strudels at home. I don't know why. I suppose it's something my dad didn't care for. We had placenta. I know how to make them. And Ma always made two different kinds. Dad and my brother Pete didn't like a lot of pumpkin in their placenta. So Ma would make some real thin ones for those two, and the rest of us got a nice helping of pumpkin in our placenta.
Now, when you got married, your husband comes from a German-Russian background.
Yes, he does.
And I'm sure that there might have been expectations of the type of food that he expected you to make. Did you have to make certain dishes for him?
Every once in a while he'd say, why don't you find out how Ma makes that rice and raisins? Hers was so good. Yours is different. So I learned how to make it. Yeah. I learned a lot of things from his mother too. You know, we come from two different worlds, so to speak, and every household is different. They cook a little different, and even though they were all German too, but some things were different.
Now, did you speak German when you were growing up?
I spoke German all the time, you know, growing up. Had to learn I knew some English from my older siblings when I started school, but that was tough. We didn't dare talk German on the school grounds. That was forbidden. You got punished if you got caught talking German. And yeah, so But my husband and I still talk German. And
Now, going back to your family though, but was German the first language for everyone in your family growing up?
German was the only language my dad ever spoke. So yeah, it was. We spoke German all the time at home, and my dad couldn't read or write. He could write numbers, and he had a really cool way of adding. He'd line them all up, and he'd count, like, say the number 4. He'd count the top 2. Dots of the number and the bottom 2, that's how he counted. And he was always right. It was always right. And he could write that much, he knew his numbers.
Was your dad born in this country?
My dad was born on a little farm about 3 miles east of Hague. But my mother was born in Klein-Liebenstall, South Russia, by the Black Sea. So she came to America with her parents when she was 4 years old. Her older sister was 6, and her younger brother was 2. And they had courage, those people.
What would have been her maiden name?
Sally, Sahli.
So your dad, who was born here, but did his parents then? They must have immigrated, didn't they?
Yes, his parents immigrated. I don't know the year. I know more about my husband's family background. I've done studies on that. But yeah, his parents came to America too.
So that's a lot of farm generations in your family on both sides, isn't it?
Yes, there's a lot of farming in both sides of our family, and my parents, they were both farmers, my mother and my father. And although my grandpa was kind of Mom's dad was a carpenter too. He built his own coffin. I know Sundays we always stop at their house after church. And I never wanted to go to the basement because that's where his coffin was. I didn't want to see that. That was scary. But they were survivors. When they came, my mother came to America, they first settled in Onega, South Dakota. And they spent quite a few nights under the trailer box that they came in. And then they had a big tent. And one night a big rainstorm came up and ripped the tent off them. And they boarded cattle for other people. And then the cattle got away. So they had to go running around in the storm to try and round up all these cattle. They got all over, and life was tough.
Did your mother's side of the family ever talk about maybe going back, that things were better over in Russia, or once they made the decision to come here, that was it?
Well, the decision was made to come to stay. Well, my mother was, young. She had I don't know if she remembered coming or not. I don't know if I ever asked her that question. But as far as the parents, there were a lot of them that would have gone back if they could have. But they scraped all their pennies together to come here, and there was just nothing left to go back. And then to live in North Dakota, the harsh winters, and that was no picnic.
From your perspective, having been in farming quite a bit, have you seen the change of a woman's role change at all over the course of the decades?
Times have really changed. I mean, when we were farming, I was the right-hand man. I was the hired man, so to speak. Where nowadays, The man farms, the women work in town. And with the farm machinery the way they have progressed, it's much easier for one person to do all that, you know. Where back, I'm just so thankful we don't farm anymore because everything seems so complicated now and expensive, and it was much simpler back in the day.
How about attitudes towards education? You sort of mentioned that earlier on, but it seems like that's changed as well.
It has. Education has changed a lot. People are starting to realize that you need an education to get a decent paying job. It's, yeah, you can get labor jobs, you know, that where you don't need so much education. But that is hard physical work. Not everybody is able or willing to work that hard. They want a little bit of an easier life, maybe. Not that an office job is so easy, but it's not as physically grueling as like farming or construction or jobs like that are. They pay good, some of those other jobs, but
I would think also the time demands would probably scare some people off. I mean, you talk about running a dairy farm. I mean, that's labor intensive.
All farming is labor intensive, especially dairy. You got to be there twice a day. And then it used to really tick me off. People would say, "What do you do with that big milk check? You can buy everything." They don't stop to realize what you have to put in the front end of that cow before you can get milk out of the cow. And it's hard to make ends meet, especially when you're raising a family. So, yeah, and your field work all needs to be done, and the rocks have to be picked, the bales have to be hauled. So, our kids all worked hard, and of course we did too.
Now, talking about your kids, did you encourage any of them to go into agriculture?
No. Well, our son that we lost, he would have been the farmer. I always looked at farming as a very, very hard life. And then our next son, our girls all married city boys, and our second son has a lot of allergies. So he's got some cattle, but it's pretty hard for him to be on the farm. And our youngest son, he thought, well, he's the youngest, he has to take over the farm. So he went to Bismarck to college, took up farm agribusiness. He came home, Ma, there's money to be made in farming. You got to know how to do it. Okay, Sonny boy, you show us. So he rented the neighbor's land. He used Dad's machinery. Dad made him pay for the fuel and for the seed, for the expensive, but no breakdowns or anything. And then he went to Germany with our exchange student for 3 weeks. And when he came back, and when it was harvesting time, "Ma, I didn't make a dime." I said, "Welcome to the real world of farming." So he went back to Fargo and went to college, and now he's in Kansas City.
When you were either growing up or when you had your own farm, did you have to, you mentioned harvest, did you have to make meals for people during harvest time?
We made meals when we did thrashing. We had a cook for all, and breakfast was at 5, and then we had to take lunch out to the field for the thrashing crew about 10 or 10:30. I don't know what time it really was. And then dinner, and then lunch again in the afternoon, and then supper. That was a lot of work. I remember butchering, chickens, and yeah, that was work.
Other than picking rocks, what was your least favorite thing to do on the farm, either as a kid or as an adult?
Hauling bales as an adult. The square bales, they're killers, especially for women. We're just not quite as strong as men. But although I was strong, but it was still hard.
What was your favorite thing to do?
Boy, go to the dance in the evening. Got nothing to do with farming, but I didn't mind going out on the tractor, working in the fields. I didn't mind that too much. I liked to run the self-propelled swatter. I liked doing that. We had an 18-foot swatter, and I could cover a lot of ground in that. Don't drive so fast, Ma. Yeah.
What type of life do you think it was for you when you grew up on a farm, and then compared it to maybe the life your kids had on the farm?
My life on the farm as a kid was much easier, I think, than what my kids or our kids had to do, when they were growing up. They too had to pick the rocks and haul the bales and milk the cows and feed the calves. And our kids helped with all the chores. Nobody got by unless you were pretty darn sick. You didn't have to go to the barn, but they all worked. And it instilled in them a work ethic that they carried with them as adults. They're all not afraid to tackle anything. They've all had good jobs, and they're all making a nice living. So, compared to, well, being one of the youngest ones, the hard work was done by the older ones. Well, like I said, I had help with the rocks and the hay, but that wasn't what. At that time, my dad didn't have as many cattle, like we did. Things were just in a smaller portion, where you got done making hay and you got done seeding your land and everything, and where nowadays everything is so big. But ours really, we didn't go so big, but still we had a lot of cattle. And so
Did your siblings go into agriculture, most of them?
uh, my oldest brother, when he came home from the war, he became a jeweler. My oldest sister married a farmer. One of the twins married a farmer. The other one didn't. My brother Pete's a farmer, was. Clara went to California and worked. My two younger brothers, well, Jack's older than I am. I had 4 siblings in California, so.
Do you get to stay close to your brothers and sisters?
What's left of them, yes. We talk on the ones that are far away, talk on the phone a lot, and my brother lives in Strasbourg. I see him quite a bit, talk to him all the time on the phone. And
now, you can't walk around this county without tripping over a Wald, so how about that side of the family? You guys pretty close, or what?
the Walds are very close, and they're a very large family. My brother in Strasbourg always says, when the Walds have something, they come out of the woodworks. But we're a close family, and everybody lives within an area where they can come to things. Like we had a Wald reunion last summer, and we had 200 people there. So that says something, you know. And when there's a funeral and an auctioneer. One of Bill's cousins is an auctioneer, and he had an auctioneer friend, and there was a wedding or something going on, and this one guy said, yeah, they're going to drink again this weekend. They're going to be partying. Yeah, the other auctioneer said, they party. But when they cry, they all cry. So that in itself, just references how close they all are. Everybody comes to the weddings, everybody comes to the funerals, with, if possible.
So even though you don't live on a farm anymore, you do live in a farming community, I would say. When you guys get together and talk, what do you talk about?
Well, we talk
Other
about
than the weather, at least.
we talk about things that are going on in town, or depending on who. There are a few people that have not farmed in town, so you try to talk about something else, what's going on in the world, or so. But if you're talking to a farm person, yeah, you're farming. And it's funny, after church on Sundays, the farmers, the younger farmers now, they'll be in a huddle someplace, and I'd sometimes look at them and I say, gee, I wonder if they're talking about farming. And sometimes they'll hear me and they'll look around at me and laugh. That's a natural thing. It's what you do. That's your life. So yeah, that's what you talk about.
And then you guys know everybody.
Well, knowing everybody is kind of cool. When one of our daughters married a guy from Bismarck, well, two of them did. But anyway, they'd be out shopping at the mall or whatever. And Darcy would know a lot more people than Jim would growing up in Bismarck. He says, how's that possible? But half of Linton, Zeeland, Strasbourg moved, Napoleon, they all moved to Bismarck. And these are people that our kids ran around with, and so yeah, it's, no matter where you go, there is somebody that or that knows you. We had in '88, we had a big centennial celebration out on our farm, because it was a Wald farm, for 100 years. And so we had a lot of people out there. And after that, a lot of people, I'd run into people at Bismarck shopping or wherever, and, oh, hi, Millie, how are you? And not a clue who they were. Well, we were at your reunion. Oh, I was a little busy there. So yeah, it's having things like that, reunions, and we've always been big on reunions. I remember when we had our first Wald reunion, each one of our kids wanted to bring a friend from school. Nope, nobody, just our kids. But we won't know anybody. Yes, you won't. That's the reason for the reunion, so you get to know your cousins. So, yeah, and they each had a friend there. They'd have hung with their friends and wouldn't have associated with the family, And they're glad it was that way, because they've made some really good friends out of cousins and second cousins, and so, and of course, when there's a Wald gathering, there's a dance. And if there's a dance, there's going to be wipeout. Those kids are crazy for that wipeout dance. Yep, polkas are a big item at the dances. The Walds are good polka dancers. Or a lot of them anyway are.
Well, there were a lot of them doing poke. Yep, it was fun. It's fun. So, is there anything that related to women in agriculture that we haven't touched on that you thought about before we did the interview here that we haven't covered?
Uh, well, as far as I'm concerned with women in agriculture, I was always at Bill's side. Or I'd be in the house doing something. He'd come in, Ma, can you come out and help me about 15 minutes? I can't quite reach this. I've got long arms where he's got short arms. And so I'd go out and help him. Hour and a half later, I'd get in the house. What was it I was doing? But yeah, I was out all the time. And something I remember from at home was in the fall of the year, my parents would go to town and they'd buy, I don't know how many bags, 100-pound bags of flour and also 100-pound bags of sugar. And that was all stored up in the attic on some barrels, laying, on top of the barrels. And I remember having to go up there with a pail or a bowl or whatever to get flour or sugar, whichever Ma needed. And Ma made a lot of stuff out of dough. Well, for one thing, we're Catholic, so there was no meat on Fridays back in those days. So yeah, there were a lot of noodles and meatless meals. So yeah, that took a lot of flour. And sugar was, during the war, was rationed. And so that was used very sparingly. And I remember my oldest brother was in World War II. And that was tough. I remember Ma standing upstairs, looking out the porch door window. And she would cry a lot and stand there and pray. And they would get letters from my brother. But there were sentences cut out of the letters. And that to me just seemed so odd. And I would ask, Ma, why is there a piece cut out? Well, Ma would say, I suppose Ben said something here that he wasn't supposed to. Like reveal where they are or things like that, But that, I remember that so well, those chopped up letters, but they were nicely, the sentences nicely cut out, It didn't destroy the whole letter. So.
And that's the brother who came home and became a jeweler?
Yes, that's the brother that became a jeweler. He, through the army, I suppose, got school paid for. I know he went to Kansas City. First he got married, and then he went to Kansas City and took the training that he needed.